All of us have a story to tell. Your witness may be the witness that brings somebody else to the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, in closing, I want to share a story with you. There was a man by the name of Edward Kimball who decided that he would go out and witness to a shoe clerk for the Lord Jesus Christ. And that shoe clerk was in that store working. We visited right there at that place where he was. I think there's a bank building there now. But he's back there in the stacks, and this man, Mr. Kimball, was a Sunday school teacher. There was a 19-year-old boy who was working there that was in his class. And Mr. Kimball laid a trembling hand on the shoulder of that 19-year-old boy and told him about Jesus. That shoe clerk received the Lord Jesus Christ. As I told you, that the plaque is still there on the wall in the place. I've got pictures of it where D.L. Moody came to the Lord Jesus Christ. That was D.L. Moody who was saved. And D.L. Moody became one of the greatest evangelists that this world has ever seen. He took 2 continents and he shook them for the Lord Jesus Christ. And he started out in Chicago, and he started out just as a Sunday school teacher. And you've heard me talk about in those states up north, in the early days they had a pew tax, and you had to pay for your pew that you were sitting in. That was the way they collected their offerings. And so he rented out a whole pew, and he was bringing little boys and girls to church, and he was teaching them in Sunday school. That's the way he started out. And then he became a great preacher. He was not formally educated. He just was a man who was determined that he was going to have the power of God on his life. He was determined that he was going to have God's power. And so he became a great speaker. And again, he was never ordained, but he was so powerful, never formally educated, but he was so powerful when he preached the gospel that he was invited over to England to preach. And there in England, he preached in the church of the great English preacher, F.B. Meyer. And F.B. Meyer was a cultured Englishman. And when Moody got up to speak, he murdered the King's English. And F.B. Meyer was ashamed. He was embarrassed that he had invited this uncouth, uncultured American into his church. But the fire of God fell on that service. You see, God uses availability. You just make yourself available to Him. The fire of God fell on that service. And F.B. Meyer said later on he was having afternoon tea with one of the ladies in his church. He said, "And how is it with you today, madam?" And she said, "It's wonderful, Dr. Meyer." She said, "Since Moody has been here, I've won every little girl in my Sunday school class to Jesus Christ." Meyer said he learned something that day about the language of the human soul. He said it transformed his life. D.L. Moody had touched his life. F.B. Meyer came to the United States, and he was preaching in a college. And the students were there listening to him preach. And F.B. Meyer was talking about surrender. And this is what he said. He said to those students, "If you are not willing to give everything to Jesus Christ, then at least tell Him that you're willing to be made willing." There was a young student that was sitting there in the service that was listening to him, a fellow by the name of J. Wilbur Chapman. J. Wilbur Chapman said, "Oh God, that's me. I haven't been willing, but would you make me willing to be made willing?" Chapman was ready to quit. He was ready to drop out of school. But he said, "God, I'm willing to be made willing." And Wilbur Chapman became a great evangelist. And J. Wilbur Chapman, in the later years of his life, as he was going out in evangelism, he needed a helper, someone to help him plan his meetings, and someone to help him lay the groundwork for the meetings that he held. And so he found a young clerk working in the YMCA, an ex-professional baseball player, a fellow by the name of Billy Sunday. And Chapman said to Billy Sunday, "Would you come and help me do the counseling and set up my tent and lay the groundwork for my meetings?" And Billy Sunday said, "I will." And many of you have heard of Billy Sunday, world famous like D.L. Moody. But Billy Sunday began to help Wilbur Chapman. And the Lord led Wilbur Chapman later in his life to pastor a church. And when Chapman retired from evangelism, the Lord led Billy Sunday into evangelism. But Billy Sunday ended up having a worldwide ministry. And millions of people were impacted by the life of Billy Sunday. Billy Sunday went to Charlotte, North Carolina in 1924, and they held a revival crusade in Charlotte, North Carolina. And there was such a mighty moving of God's power in Charlotte, North Carolina, that a prayer meeting got started, and it continued right on through when the Depression came. And those men were praying, and they were saying, God, send another revival to Charlotte that will shake Charlotte and will shake the world. And as a result of those prayers, Mordecai Ham came to Charlotte, North Carolina for another crusade. And in that crusade, when Mordecai Ham was preaching, a young, tall, lanky, 16-year-old farm lad came forward, and he gave his life to Jesus Christ. His name was Billy Graham. Billy Graham, who has preached to kings and princes, hosted presidents around the world. He's been on national television across this country and around the world today. But how did it all start? You can trace it back, all the way back to say, I'm not anybody for Christ. You can trace it back to a Sunday school teacher who got serious about soul winning and went and told a shoe clerk about Jesus. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, we don't know the impact. We may not know till we get to heaven the impact that we will have on somebody if we'll just get serious about this thing of sharing Jesus Christ with other people and leading somebody to Jesus Christ. Do you want to have power with God? Recognize His presence in you. Receive His promise to you and respond to His program through you.